Hi, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will learn to configure multi-factor or two-factor authentication on-premise Fury Launchpad using Keycloak, an open-source identity and access management tool. Keycloak is available as free to download under Apache, licensed in multiple deployment options. I will be using standalone server deployment for this purpose, but the configuration step will not change based on deployment options. This video covers configuration aspect of Keycloak, though standalone installation is fairly simple and it requires just a single command. The SAML configuration steps are nearly identical in all SAP Netweaver versions. We will be using 7.52 for this video. We will be using Keycloak as identity provider and SAP Netweaver as a service provider. So let's get started. First, I have already logged in my SAP Netweaver. I also logged into my Keycloak admin panel. So the first thing we need to do is we need to configure SAP Netweaver as a service provider. So I will run SAML2 transaction to configure a service provider. If you see an error page here, you need to activate SAML2 service in SICF. So let's create SAML2 local provider. I will give us local provider name as sapnetweaver.jam.io, which is the name of the host. Next. No change here. Next. The identity provider and provider discovery or common domain cookie is the one which shows on the login page of Netweaver. So we will leave it this automatic, so we don't have to press continue button every time. And finish. Now with this configuration, we have our local provider. Now we have to set up a trusted providers, and what we will be doing is we will be setting Keycloak as our trusted provider. So let's go back to Keycloak and we will download SAML2 identity provider metadata, because to configure trusted providers, all we need is a metadata. So I already have a file. I'm just going to rewrite that, replace. We'll go back to our SAP Netweaver trusted provider configuration. I will upload that metadata file, Keycloak meta. Next. Alias, we don't need alias, but if you prefer to have an alias on the logon page, you can maintain. But since we set up an automatic and we have only one primary identity provider, we will not see the continue page, so we don't need the alias. Continue. No change here, but remember one thing: if you are planning on to deploy in a production environment, I would recommend to change digest algorithm to something other than SHA-1 or a stronger algorithm, or possibly SHA-256, because SHA-1 can be cracked. Next. Single sign-on endpoints, we don't need any changes. Single logout endpoints, no changes. Artifacts, no changes. Authentication context settings, this will be used for authenticating user coming from Keycloak, so we will set up an attribute. Comparison method minimum, and we will add passport protected transport and finish. Now we set up a trust relationship between Keycloak and SAP Netweaver. Now next thing we need to do is we need to set up an attribute which can identify user coming from Keycloak, and we will do that by using email. So Keycloak is going to pass an email, and in SAP we will identify that email using alias, user alias. So here I will change user ID mapping mode to logon alias, and in the end, when we'll create user in SAP Netweaver, we will make sure to update system or user alias which should be the email ID on Keycloak. Save and enable. Are you sure you want to enable trusted provider? Yes. Now if we go back to local provider, this is also enabled. So we have we created service provider, a local provider, and we also set up a trusted provider, which is a Keycloak. Now second part, we need to set up Keycloak client, which is SAP Netweaver as a client. So the way we downloaded metadata for identity provider in Keycloak, and we use that metadata to set up our trusted provider in SAP Netweaver, we will do the reverse now. We will get a metadata from SAP Netweaver and we'll set up Keycloak as a identity provider, or we will add SAP Netweaver as a client in Keycloak. So let's download metadata. Download metadata. I will save as a metadata. Save. Okay, we are good. Now we'll go back and we'll use that file, metadata file, which we just changed. Metadata, save. And now if I scroll down here, valid redirect URL, I should have HTTPS as a protocol and port number 44300. So we are good with that. With this step, we have a bidirectional trust set between a Keycloak as identity provider and SAP Netweaver as a service provider. Now the next step is to create user in Keycloak and SAP Netweaver. So since we are already in Keycloak here, we will create a user. So I will say add a user. I will add Tony Stark as a user. And if you don't know who Tony Stark is, you should start Googling now. Tony Stark Industries.com. I will copy that just to make sure we did not do a spell error, and save. I will set up a password, and I don't want to keep this as a temporary. I want to use this password, so I'm gonna turn off temporary, set password, and with this we have with this configuration we have a user now, Tony as a user in Keycloak. Now we'll go back to our SAP Netweaver. I will launch SU01, which is a user maintenance transaction, and I will copy my user, which is a developer user, to Tony. And this is a shortcut to create a user quickly. Okay, so we copied a user, and remember earlier in the video I mentioned that we need to map using user alias. That is what we are going to do it here. So alias is the email ID which we just copied from Keycloak. We will maintain that along with a password, and password, save. So we are good. Now on first login, system will prompt for password change, so I will do that now. I will log in. Okay, as expected, password change prompt. I will change password here. Okay, so let's confirm our Tony user is active and working in a backend. Now we have everything in place. We set up a bidirectional trust between SAP Netweaver and Keycloak as an identity provider. We created user in Keycloak. We also created user in SAP Netweaver. We maintained their attributes, which is basically an email ID in a Keycloak and a user alias in SAP Netweaver. So we did that. Now we will run our test and we'll see if it works. So first thing, I need to launch Fiori Launchpad using UI to FLP because I don't have a URL handy. we will launch Launchpad. We'll copy this URL. Okay, I will open a incognito window and I will type that, or I'll paste that URL. Now, as you can see, as soon as I launch the Launchpad, Fiori Launchpad, I got redirected to Keycloak login, and that's what we configured. So here I will log in with user Tony and password in Keycloak. And if everything is set up properly, we should get redirect back to SAP Fiori Launchpad without any error. So let's see. Login. Here we can access applications as we used to do it without SAML or without MFA. Now, this is the SSO part we configured. Now only part remain is the multi-factor authentication, and that's a straightforward fix. So here in Keycloak under user, I have to set up an action required for configure OTP. And if I set up that and save, now if I launch Launchpad, you will see an instant difference. So my user login. Now you can see system is prompting for to use authenticator. There are two options. We could use free OTP or Google Authenticator. All we need to do is download one of these apps and point camera to this QR code. That will generate a one-time password. That password we need to enter it here. You can label a device, and every time whenever you try to log in, system is gonna pop up for one-time password like what we see it here. And every time you can use either of the apps, get the password and put it here. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.